Welcome back to the deep dive. It's been really interesting going through all this stuff you guys have sent in. A lot of it's been about strategy, thinking strategically.
It's a fascinating area, isn't it? So many different approaches and angles.
Yeah, and one thing that really jumped out at me from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War is this idea of deny them targets.
Strategy 26.
Yeah, the strategy of the void.
It's one that kind of grabs you right away because it's not what you'd necessarily expect when you think about strategy. It's not about going head to head. It's about becoming almost untouchable.
Right, right. It's like the strength comes from not being there, from being so elusive that your opponents just wear themselves out trying to hit a target that isn't really there.
And that's really what we're going to unpack today. Like, why is this so effective? What are some good examples of this in action? And most importantly, how can you, the listener, start to think about this in your own life, in your own strategy? So let's jump in.
Okay, let's do it.
The real kind of shift with this strategy is that it kind of turns our thinking on its head, because our instinct is often to confront a problem, to meet it, head on. But this strategy says, well, actually, there's a deeper kind of strength, a deeper power in not presenting a clear target to attack in the first place. So the more undefined you are, whether it's your intentions or your position on something, or even, your what people perceive as your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, the harder it is for anyone to get a grip on you, to really figure you out, let alone gain any kind of advantage over you.
So it's like a strategic game of hide and seek almost, If they can't find you, they can't get to you.
Right.
And the source material emphasizes, I think, some pretty significant consequences for the person who's trying to attack this void. They're basically putting all their energy, all their resources into hitting nothing solid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that wasted effort, that really starts to cause all sorts of problems for them. They're burning through their resources. They're not seeing any results for their efforts, and that leads to a lot of frustration. But it's more than just annoyance, right? It actually can tap into a very kind of basic, human need for achievement.
Yeah.
And when those efforts are constantly met with nothing, it can breed a sense of helplessness, and it actually starts to impair their ability to think strategically in other areas too.
Yeah.
The whole approach can kind of unravel because of this constant sense of futility.
And, when you think about historical examples of this, the one that really jumps out, I think, is the Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War is a really powerful illustration of this because, think about the disparity in conventional military power. The U.S. military had everything. They had the weapons, they had the numbers, they had the technology.
Right.
And yet they found themselves in this very protracted and ultimately unsuccessful conflict against the Viet Cong.
Yeah, and it's precisely because the Viet Cong didn't engage in the kind of large-scale conventional battles that the U.S. military was built for, was trained for. Instead, their strength was in almost becoming one with the landscape, right? They would move through the jungle almost invisibly, launch these quick attacks, and then just disappear back into the void, basically.
Right. It's almost like they mastered this art of blending in with the environment itself, and the U.S. military, with their training for traditional warfare, where you've got clear front lines, you've got identifiable enemy units. They just had a really hard time pinning down a target, finding that consistent fixed point of attack, and this constant searching, this inability to kind of land a decisive blow. It was incredibly frustrating, and it really took a toll on resources, both in terms of equipment, obviously, but also in terms of morale. The Viet Cong's ability to disperse, to blend in, to utilize their local knowledge, that created this information imbalance that made it even harder to target them effectively. So the takeaway there seems to be, if your opponent can't really get a good fix on you, they're basically exhausting themselves trying. Yeah. And Greene, in the source material, he kind of breaks down some of the key outcomes, I think, of this target denial. He does. He talks about three sort of primary consequences for the adversary. The first is confusion. If you can't figure out where somebody is or what their intentions are, you just don't know where to direct your efforts, right? You're constantly second guessing.
Right.
And then the second is frustration. I mean, when you're trying to make an impact and you're just not seeing any results, that's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that frustration leads to mistakes. So you start making rash decisions, you start miscalculating, and then finally there's exhaustion. I mean, just the constant effort of trying to fight an enemy that you can't see, that you can't pin down. It's incredibly draining, both physically and psychologically.
It's fascinating too that this isn't just limited to military conflict.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, this principle of denying targets, it seems to pop up in all sorts of different
If
areas.
we kind of zoom out and look at the broader picture,
Yeah.
I mean, you can see this operating in business, in politics, in personal relationships. I mean, all over the place.
Yeah, let's take business for example.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
think about companies that are constantly innovating. They're always coming out with new products, new services. They're constantly moving, and and what that does is it puts their competitors in this position of always trying to catch up. They're always reacting instead of setting their own agenda, their own strategy. I
Yep.
mean, think about a startup, right? That's constantly pivoting its product line based on customer feedback.
Right.
They're never really giving their competitors a chance to analyze what they're doing, to formulate a counter strategy. So it's a very real form of denying a fixed target in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's like trying to aim at something that's constantly shifting. And then you see it in leadership, in politics too.
Right, right. Politicians who are really skilled at dodging direct attacks, at not getting pinned down on every issue, they make it very difficult for their opponents to criticize them effectively. If you're not taking a rigid stance, if you're not always predictable in your responses, then you're presenting a much less vulnerable target.
And it's even applicable, I think, to just our everyday interactions, in our personal lives.
Absolutely. Being a little bit unpredictable in the way you respond to things, in the way you behave, that can actually be a way of preventing other people from manipulating you, from controlling you. If they can't anticipate your reactions, then it's much harder for them to kind of to exploit you, to play on your weaknesses. And this is a good point to think about, for you, the listener. I mean, can you think of any situations in your own relationships, in your own life, where being a little less predictable, being a little harder to target, might actually give you an advantage?
Definitely something to reflect on. And speaking of modern examples, the source material talks about Elon Musk and his approach to dealing with media criticism, which is pretty unconventional.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's notable about Musk is that he he doesn't seem to have a consistent or predictable reaction to criticism.
Hmm.
Sometimes he'll deflect with humor, sometimes he'll just ignore it completely, sometimes he'll actually like amplify it in these weird and unexpected ways.
Right. It's like he's deliberately trying to not get pinned down.
Exactly. He doesn't want to be put in a box. He doesn't want to be predictable in his responses, either emotionally or in terms of his actual stance on something. And so just when his critics think they've got him figured out, he does something completely different. And what that does is it makes it really, really difficult to build a sustained, effective, attack against him because they're constantly having to adjust. They're constantly having to reevaluate. So it's a very powerful lesson, I think. If you don't react in the way that your opponents expect you to, then you take away a lot of their power. Have you seen that dynamic at play, with other public figures or even in your own interactions, like online or in person?
Oh yeah, I can definitely think of a few instances where that kind of unexpected reaction has really thrown people off. So
Yeah.
so if someone wants to start applying this strategy, like what are some of the key things to keep in mind?
I think one of the most important things is to really cultivate a kind of fluidity and unpredictability in your actions and your responses.
Yeah.
You don't want to become this static, entity that can easily be analyzed and targeted.
Right.
And as the source material points out, rigidity is a huge vulnerability. I mean, if your actions and reactions are predictable, if people know exactly what you're going to do, then it's very easy for them to strategize against you.
So it's about keeping them guessing, maintaining that element of surprise.
Exactly. And by being elusive, you can often influence the dynamics of a situation without actually having to engage in direct confrontation. You're kind of setting the terms of engagement by making yourself difficult to engage with effectively.
And this whole idea of avoiding direct confrontation, it reminds me a lot of Sun Tzu and his ancient wisdom on strategy.
Sun Tzu is fascinating because he understood this power of indirect strategy, centuries and centuries ago. He said that the most skilled generals are the ones who avoid unnecessary battles altogether.
Mm.
Their mastery lies in maneuvering the enemy into a position of weakness rather than meeting them head on, strength against strength.
Right. So it's not just about being hard to hit when a fight breaks out. It's about positioning yourself so that a direct attack becomes less likely or even unnecessary.
Exactly. Victory in this context is not just about your ability to attack, it's about making yourself impossible to attack effectively. And that really takes us back to that core idea, right? That the most powerful strategies are often the ones that are the most counterintuitive. Sometimes your greatest strength is your absence as a clear target.
And the source material does make a really important point about the danger of becoming too elusive.
Yeah, this is a really crucial nuance. Denying targets is a powerful strategy, but you don't want to disappear so completely that you become irrelevant.
Right.
If you become totally detached, totally inaccessible, then you risk missing out on opportunities. You risk losing your ability to influence the situation at all.
So it's about striking a balance.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You want to be hard to target, but you don't want to be absent. You still need to be present. You still need to be able to pursue your own goals. You still need to be in control.
And the story of Nokia and how they lost their dominance in the mobile phone market, I think that's a really good example of this.
What's striking about Nokia is
Yeah.
that they were the dominant player for a long time, right? But when they were confronted with this new wave of smartphones,
Yeah.
Apple with the iPhone, Google with Android, their response was very much kind of reactive and defensive. And they hesitated to really embrace this new paradigm, this new way of doing things, and they clung to their old strategies for too long.
It's almost like they were trying to deny the attack by staying put, by not really engaging with the new competitive landscape.
Right. They became so focused on protecting what they had, on holding on to their market share, that they didn't adapt, they didn't innovate, and by the time they did try to catch up, the market had already moved on.
So the lesson there is that it's not enough to just make yourself a void. You have to deny attacks, but you also have to stay engaged. You have to stay in control.
Exactly. You have to be able to adapt, you have to be able to evolve, you have to be able to influence the environment.
So if we were to boil this down to some actionable steps,
Mhm.
what are some things that someone could do to start applying this strategy?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is to cultivate unpredictability in your responses, in your actions. Don't let people get you figured out. Don't let them anticipate your moves. Be a little bit unpredictable.
Right.
The second thing is to avoid unnecessary conflicts.
Mhm.
Don't waste your energy on battles that don't matter. Let your opponents wear themselves out on things that aren't really important.
Okay.
The third thing is to be adaptable. When you're challenged, be willing to shift your position. Be willing to change your approach. Don't become a fixed target.
Got it.
And then the fourth thing is to use a little bit of mystery. If your intentions aren't totally clear, if your capabilities aren't totally transparent, that can actually be an advantage. It can introduce doubt. It can create hesitation in your opponents.
Interesting.
And then finally, I think the most important thing is to remember that this is not just about defense. It's not just about avoiding attacks. It's about control. It's about controlling the terms of engagement.
And the source material gives a really interesting example of this in the modern business world with Bitcoin and decentralized finance.
Bitcoin is a fascinating case study because it's inherently resistant to traditional forms of control, right? I mean,
Right.
unlike traditional currencies, unlike banks, it doesn't have a central governing authority. It doesn't have a fixed location. It doesn't have, identifiable leaders in the traditional sense.
Right. It's decentralized. It's distributed. It's almost like a phantom in the financial system.
Exactly. And because of that, it's incredibly difficult to regulate. It's incredibly difficult to shut down. I mean, governments, banks, they don't have a clear target to go after.
So it's almost like it embodies this strategy of denying targets on a massive scale.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And the lesson there is really profound. It's that when you deny your opponent a way to attack you effectively, when you make yourself truly untouchable, then you can achieve this incredible level of resilience.
Hmm.
You become almost unstoppable.
So as we kind of wrap up here, this deep dive into deny them targets, it really highlights the power of making yourself difficult to engage with.
Absolutely. The most effective strategists understand that true power isn't just about winning a fight. It's about controlling the terms of the fight. It's about being adaptable, being unpredictable, being elusive.
It's about wearing your opponents down while you conserve your own strength, your own energy.
Exactly.
And the source material leaves us with a really, really powerful question. It says, am I making myself an easy target, or should I disappear and let them waste their energy?
And then the final thought from the source, which I think sums it up beautifully, is deny them targets, and you will always have the upper hand.
This strategy gives us a new lens through which to view our challenges, big and small, and I think it encourages us to really think about how we can integrate this principle into our own lives, into our own work. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.